Hey everybody, it's Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast. Thank you for hanging out with me as always. I know you have a bajillion things going on and lots of stuff that you can do with your time, and yet you make time to do this. So thank you. That means a tremendous amount to me. That said, I'm about to use an example that some of you are going to resonate with and others of you are going to be like, why do you do that? Why do you open with examples from like pop culture stuff that we don't know because it's not as much fun? And to that I would say, I'm super sorry, but I'll get past it quickly and I think it'll all pay off in the end. The Lord of the Rings. Most of you have probably at least seen a movie or some clips from that cinematic universe. That cinematic universe is drawn from one of the great fiction authors of the 20th century, J.R.R. Tolkien. And in this universe, maybe the most visible, recognizable, iconic character is a wizard named Gandalf. Now, Gandalf looks like he's a dude in his 70s, but the reality is Gandalf in these stories is very, very, very old, and he's from very far away. These wizard characters are almost like angels in a sense. I don't know what else to quite liken them to. But what comes out from time to time as the story unfolds is that this Gandalf character has other names, and the most prominent of these other names is Mithrandir. And the first time you see it as you're reading through the book, the first time you hear it when you're watching the show, you're like, wow, I didn't even catch that. I don't know what that word is. That's confusing. But eventually you hear it enough times, you're like, oh, that's his name. And the people who use that name use it to indicate that they see who Gandalf really is. They know who he is. They know the bigger story. They know where he fits. They have a little better sense of what role he's playing and who he is and what he's doing and the grandness of him compared to the temporalness of everybody else that's a part of the story. And at times, it's said with great reverence and respect, like when Galadriel uses it. There's a kinship that comes there. It's almost like these two ancient characters have the opportunity to let their guard down with each other a little bit and be like, we see who each other are. But it can also be used with spite. There's a human pretender who sits on a throne named Denethor, whose use of the term Mithrandir just drips with poison. You think you are wise, Mithrandir. Whoa, like he's saying, I see through you, wizard. I see who you actually are. And I'm not making this stuff up. I mean, this is a theme that is pronounced throughout the books, and it even comes through in the movies because the movies are a faithful and good adaptation of the books for the most part. Likewise, though, when you get to chapter 20 of the book of Matthew, you've seen the name Jesus of Nazareth, used a whole bunch. But there are these encounters that happen from time to time where people use other names, other titles for Jesus. We see Jesus using another title for himself. His favorite title for himself is the Son of Man. Other people run up to him and call him Lord. I think of the centurion who trotted up to him in chapter 8 and demonstrated great faith. He didn't have the theological sophistication to use any other title, but just generically used Lord, acknowledging that Jesus was a person in authority, and then went on to communicate that, like, no, really, I recognize authority when I see it. You have it. You can heal my kid. So we see that term Lord from time to time. The rich young ruler in chapter 19 uses the term teacher, probably one that comes with less respect. But there's one term in particular that to me rings a bit like Mithrandir in The Lord of the Rings. There's a knowingness to it. And when people use this term, it is always in the book of Matthew presented as though they get something, they see something that the others don't see about who Jesus actually is. And Jesus seems to always respond favorably to being called this title. And the title is Son of David. And we're going to see that title again right here in the passage that we're just starting to look at today, which picks up in Matthew 20, verse 19, and goes thusly. As Jesus and his disciples were leaving Jericho, a large crowd followed him. 2 blind men were sitting by the roadside. When they heard that Jesus was going by, they shouted, "Lord, Son of David, have mercy on us." The crowd rebuked them and told them to be quiet, but they shouted all the louder, "Lord, Son of David, have mercy on us." Jesus stopped and called them. "What do you want me to do for you?" he asked. "Lord," they answered, "we want our sight." Jesus had compassion on them and touched their eyes. Immediately they received their sight and followed him. There's a lot we need to talk about in this passage, but I mean, I just did like 5 minutes of setup on that whole Son of David thing, so we're going to work on that first. So we first see this Son of David title. Do you remember? Maybe you remember. I think I mentioned it the other day. I'm giving you a second to impress everybody around you. Just shriek it at your gym or in the grocery store. Ready? It's in chapter 1, verse 1. Like the very first thing, second thing that we learn about Jesus is that he's the son of David. I guess the first thing we learn is that Matthew claims that he is the Christ, the Messiah. Here's the verse. A record of the genealogy of Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham. It's absolutely direct. It's right up front. It's like, this is the thesis of the whole thing. And well, what do you know? The thesis isn't just that he's the Messiah. That's going to be something that you and I really fixate on, and that, well, I think we have really fixated on as we've worked through this document. But the original audience, who would be overwhelmingly Jewish, would be interested to know that he was the son of Abraham, but very interested to know whether or not he was the son of David, because if he's the son of David, then he actually could be the Messiah and the Christ. To you and me as outsiders, maybe we don't think of it in quite that order. We're like, well, I don't know, what's a Messiah? I suppose he could be like, did he do cool things? Did he teach amazing stuff? Did it seem like he was super good? Like, is he from God? Is he the son of God? Well, that sounds like a Messiah to me, I guess. But for the Jewish person, that Messiah had to come from the line of David, and not just physically descended from David. Lots of people were physically descended from David. He had to meet a whole bunch of criteria that had been established prophetically over the centuries that people were looking forward to. And when they saw it, they knew that would be the Messiah. So right off the bat, Matthew addresses this, and this is a big swing. He's the Messiah. He's the son of David. And then David comes up again in verse 8. He's the son of so-and-so. And Obed was the father of Jesse. Jesse, the father of King David. David was the father of Solomon. So we get more David stuff there. And then we talk about David specifically again at the end of the genealogy. Thus, there were 14 generations in all from Abraham to David. 14 from David to the exile in Babylon. And 14 from the exile to Christ. And then David comes up again just a couple verses later where Joseph gets told, Joseph, son of David, do not be afraid to take Mary home as your wife, because what is conceived in her is from the Holy Spirit. And then just a couple lines later, David is going to get acknowledged again, though not quite by name. Herod sees what's working out with all of these signs, and it looks like it points to something, and even crazy Herod is able to be like, yeah, give me the wise men and stuff who study this stuff, because I think that might be the Christ, and that would be a problem for me. Remind me again, guys, where's the Christ supposed to be born? And they're like in Bethlehem in Judea, and though it doesn't say it explicitly in the book of Matthew, Bethlehem, of course, is a city associated with David. Then Jesus issues the famous Sermon on the Mount, comes down the hill after that, does a bunch of miraculous stuff, and a couple of blind guys come charging after him. And they won't leave him alone. Like, they're busting into his house to make sure they get his attention. And they sound a lot like the guys we're talking about in the passage we're looking at today in Matthew chapter 20, because they're like, hey, son of David, have mercy on us. And Jesus asks them, do you believe I'm able to do that? Yes, Lord, they replied. And then he touched their eyes and said, according to your faith, it'll be done for you. So yet another reference to this David thing. And there's another one in here. It's in verse 12. It's in the middle somewhere. I'm triangulating. I've almost got it. There we go. Then they brought him a demon-possessed man who was blind and mute, and Jesus healed him so that he could both talk and see. And the people were astonished and said, could this be the son of David? You seeing this Mithrandir theme? It's like the people who are starting to have their eyes opened or have had their eyes opened, they see that Jesus is this connection, that he's from something bigger, that he's from something more ancient, more complete, and they're seeing him more fully as he is than the religious leaders and the people who should be able to recognize him for who he is. And then we fast forward to chapter 15, and another lady who should not theoretically see Jesus for who he is does, and she runs up to him on the big northern road trip that he took, and she says, Lord, son of David, have mercy on me. My daughter's suffering terribly from demon possession. And that takes us back to chapter 20, where two more blind dudes are calling out to the son of David, Lord, son of David, have mercy on us. It's exactly the same phrase that we see being used in other places. And then we're going to see one more reference to Son of David in just a few verses as Jesus enters Jerusalem and people shout out, Hosanna to the Son of David. The bigness and the depth and the power and the efficacy and the mystery of Gandalf are hinted at when you hear this other greater, more profound name of recognition that gets attached to him. And throughout those books, there's an instant connection that is different from all of the other connections between Mithrandir and people who know him by that name, or who are saying, I see who you are. You are something more than what people think, or more than what people would commonly see. Likewise, every single time we see that used in the book of Matthew, it is an indicator that somebody sees that Jesus is something more than what everybody else is catching. He's not just a teacher. He's not just a wise man. He's not just a good rabbi or leader with good ideas. He is the completion of the law and the prophets. He is the completion of everything that came before. And remember, how many times have we looked at Matthew 5:17 and said that is the central teaching of Jesus in the book of Matthew in terms of his messiahship. This is a restatement of the thesis from Jesus' own lips that Matthew opens with in chapter 1, verse 1. Remember, Matthew 5:17, don't think that I came to do away with all the stuff that came before. The law and the prophets would be the catch-all term for that everybody would have recognized. I didn't come to abolish the law and the prophets, but to fulfill them. Jesus is the completion of the story, going on 500 episodes now. We've put it this way, but all of the early stuff, the ancient story, the grand story that seems millions of miles away to the original audience goes ba-da-da-da-da, and it leaves it hanging right there. Then we get this gap, and then Matthew opens with, but Jesus is dun-dun. Thank you so much to all of you who support the podcast at patreon.com/the TMBH podcast. This thing does not happen without that group of people. So you are awesome. Thank you a ton for making this go for a whole number of reasons. We have it set up right now where I, quote, charge the patrons for each week of podcast on Monday in advance. And then on any month where we have 5 Mondays, or in the past we've done bonus episodes or reformatted an old talk that I did at some point. But I am so excited to keep cruising through Matthew that this week is one of those odd outlier 5th weeks, and we're just going to do it, and we're not going to charge the patrons, and we're just going to go because it's fun and it's interesting, and I don't want to take a sidetrack into some other material. I want to charge forward. So we're doing this. Thank you to the patrons. If you feel like supporting the show, you can join them again at patreon.com/the-TMBH podcast. You can also not, because it's the internet and it's free, and I'm going to do this one way or the other. I'm just glad you're here and that we get to hang out together. Matt, this is the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast. Let's do this again soon.